Welcome to Crossover the Pond, brought to you by 21 Media Productions and Sports Social. He's Drew Lasker, I'm Josh Sexton, and this is episode 8 as we continue our NBA basketball journey, a short hezzy tween and stutter step away here in the UK. Drew, the NBA Cup is over. The New York Knicks are the champions. I've got the Yankee on today just to make
I
sure that I'm
see you,
repping for the
man.
NYC. How you doing? How you feeling?
Oh man, the NBA Cup is catching on with the Yanks. I must say, all the coverage that I've watched over the last week, the podcasts that I listened to, it feels like it's starting to grow. It's starting to catch on. It took a little while. I like to say that I told you guys, but man, what a run. What a run. What a journey. Congratulations to the Knicks.
Absolutely, congratulations to the Knicks. We will get on to them more. We're going to react to last night's Emirates NBA Cup final, or this morning's. For me and Drew, I've just watched it before. We've come on the call here, bright and early here in the UK. We're going to finish up cleaning the glass as well, keeping our promise, mine and Drew's promise, to discuss all 30 NBA teams as we go deeper on the Denver Nuggets, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and unfortunately for us and them, the Sacramento Kings. And that will be all 30 teams done then, so me and Drew can do something exciting next week, having talked about all 30 of these guys across the league. But currently, Drew, the two flavours of the league, given the Emirates NBA Cup participation in the final last night, the San Antonio Spurs and the New York Knicks. I have to say, I was so impressed with both of these teams watching this game back last night. Really exciting game. Like, even when you look at all the counting stats and stuff from the box score, like most of the things that go across the box score in terms of shot attempts, 3 point attempts, rebounding, um, lack of turnovers and things like that. Like, these two teams were super on it last night, and that's considering that there was a couple of things going against both teams. Really, the New York Knicks without Landry Shamet and Miles McBride, who've been two of their better 3 point shooters this season. The San Antonio Spurs had Victor Wembanyama coming off the bench as he comes back from his injury too. Karl Anthony Towns goes down late in this game, or at least comes out late, and doesn't. We don't really see him until later into the fourth quarter. So both teams really dealing with a couple of things, and yet one of the things I felt like I was most impressed by was tough shot making, tough shot taking, and listen, the OKC Thunder have just only lost their second game of the season. But for my prediction in terms of the finals being the New York Knicks and the OKC Thunder, if it comes down to a game of who can take and make the toughest shots, I like this New York Knicks team, Drew. I've got to be honest with you.
Well, it's kind of fitting that they have this post-game award where they give the Timberland boots away. I can't remember off the top of my head what the actual award is, but basically to sum it up, it's a staple of New York, rugged, tough, blue collar. And that's what it feels like these Knicks are, right? I was completely shocked at this result. I'm not gonna lie. I had San Antonio. I know we didn't get an opportunity to come on here and talk about the pregame predictions going into this championship game. Both of us had OKC in the final. We didn't have San Antonio, but we did have the Knicks. But I did say, because I covered San Antonio last week in the semifinal game against the Lakers, and I mentioned on the Amazon telecast that the Spurs really remind me of OKC Thunder when you really think about it, right? Like their depth, the options that they have, the multiple lineups that they can throw out there. So I wasn't surprised to see them, make it to the championship game, especially when Wemby made his return because he is the X factor, right? He was like a plus, he was 15 or plus on his plus or minus in just 22 minutes against OKC Thunder. But going into this final, I had San Antonio with the edge just because I felt that they could win this game if Wemby didn't have his best showing. Whereas on the other hand, you look at the Knicks, it's really hard to see a scenario where the Knicks could win a game if Brunson wasn't on his A game, right? Obviously, Brunson stepped up like he usually does. I just felt that San Antonio could win in a variety of ways, whereas New York you had to have Cat and Brunson come to the table, but New York is slowly starting to show us that they can put out their different lineups. If you just look at the fourth quarter with with Coach going with Kolick over Bridges. So yeah, Bridges only 3 minutes in the fourth quarter. Coach he rolled the dice with Kolick. So, this New York team is really impressive. And a guy that's, I know the NBA Cup, it really annoyed me seeing that clip from Charles Barkley saying that this is, disappointing that the NBA has to put this cup in to motivate guys or whatever. Still kind of this old school way of media with Charles Barkley inside the NBA. But a guy that's played in Europe and that has won a cup competition mid-season, what it does for a team of the Knicks that, a lot of pundits are putting them as the favorites in the East. All it does is give you that reassurance, that confidence that, you know what, actually, we are a championship caliber team. And actually, we might not need to tinker with the roster because there's been some trade rumors with Karl Anthony Towns. And so, really, really impressive for the New York Knicks. Shout out to Spike Lee, their front court and center, and they deserve it.
Absolutely, yeah. And one of the things I think I was probably most impressed by from both teams' perspective, Drew, when you mentioned about being able to mix up offenses, was how many guys on both sides were in double digits from last night. Again, like looking down at the box score, I only watched the all possession stream, so you do sort of lose a little bit of context. So I always try and cross reference that with the box score as well. And the minute I looked down at the box score, I was like, wow, there was that many guys in double digits. There was 7 guys in double digits on both sides of the coin last night. And you've mentioned Tyler Kolek there closing the game for the New York Knicks and hitting some clutch free throws and even buckets down the stretch as well to make sure that he secured this one. Jordan Clarkson is a guy that last time when we referenced the Knicks, we mentioned had been pretty inefficient really by his standards on the whole this season, but he turns up with 3 for 7 on threes in this game and 6 for 15 from the field in general. It just felt
And
like role players were
8 points in the fourth quarter for
8 points
Clarkson as
in the
well.
fourth, yeah. And it just feels like guys were really coming to the fore in this one that weren't necessarily the main guys. And as you mentioned, Jalen Brunson I think is probably always going to get it done for the New York Knicks really, and he continues to fly in the face of. I think it was Max Kellerman on the Zach Lowe show the other week. I referenced it on the pod here the other week as well, saying that you can't win anything with a small guard with a 6 foot guard. I think Jalen Brunson is proving that point wrong, to be honest. But then you see other guys coming out the woodwork, a major game from OG Anunoby, and then over on the Spurs side, Dylan Harper being the guy leading the scoring in the absence of major minutes from Wemby. Luke Cornett putting in a big performance as the centre in this one with Wemby out as well. 78% from the field from Luke Cornett as an above the rim guy. Just so much to like on both sides of the coin here. And Mitch Johnson came out after the game and said that you can see that Spurs can be a really good team, but you can also see the things they need to improve on. And I've got to be honest, Drew, like the room for improvement that we're talking about in the NBA at the moment is feels like we're having to do it all relative to what the OKC Thunder are putting up night after night. And I don't think that's fair to most of these teams because what the OKC Thunder are putting up night to night is, incredible in comparison to most NBA teams ever. I think these San Antonio Spurs and the New York Knicks on any given season in the NBA look like they could be championship contenders for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Brunson there, and you're right. It's amazing how the narrative continues to change when you talk about the evolution of the NBA, of what style is going to prevail. And it wasn't very long ago that Kevin Durant was on Steve Nash's and LeBron James's podcast, and he talked about how the guard, the 6 foot guard, is gonna become an extinct, like a Kyrie Irving. But again, you mentioned that with Jalen Brunson, and why can't he lead a team to a championship? He is incredibly skilled. He's like a throwback scorer, and what really impresses me about him is that like he doesn't overwhelm you with size and athleticism like you see with a lot of these new age guards, but he wins with intelligence, toughness, and elite footwork. And what's the most impressive is that, you know, this is talked about a lot, is that, this is a teaching point for guards out there. And a lot of things that I try to preach to my teams is that get to 2 feet when you get inside the paint, and the listener might be thinking, well, what exactly do you mean? Well, usually athletic guards, when they attack the rim, they try to take off on 1 foot. But when you take off on 1 foot, your options are very limited. The only option that you have is athleticism. So if there's a shot blocker in the vicinity, all you have is to try to hang and avoid that. And most of the time you throw up a wild shot. However, when you look at someone like Brunson, who has the ability to get to 2 feet, there's much more options at your disposal. You can pass, you can pump fake, you can step through, which he does a lot. He's great at doing, and so or you could pivot, or his signature turnaround jump shot, like a big man. So his 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 bag inside the paint for a very small guard is like on a Kevin Durant level. And then when you look at the wings that he's flanked with wings with length like OG, Bridges, and Hart. Even though Hart is 6'4", 6'5", Hart plays like he's 6'8" because his rebounding ability. But the most um, impressive thing again about these Knicks that they have is the intangibles, the toughness. And that is something that checks all boxes in the playoffs, because that's what the playoffs become about, right? Like the game slows down. It's a lot more physical. You don't get as many foul calls. The Knicks have the personnel to be built to go for the long haul.
Absolutely, yeah, and you've used a couple of words to describe some of the intangible things there. And one of the things that I noticed in particular, over Jalen Brunson's career, really, but then definitely on these Knicks as well, is fearless. And you mentioned about, teaching young guys lessons. And one of the things that I've never really liked in terms of NBA coverage, and listen, I completely understand it, but is when you talk about guys like centers and guys who protect the paint, who it says they have the ability to change a shot. I sometimes think if you're good enough, and especially if you're someone like Jalen Brunson, if you're good enough, then no one can change a shot because you don't let them change a shot. You make sure you, as you say, you get 2 feet into the paint and you get whichever kind of shot you want, and you be fearless in doing so. And maybe not 9 times out of 10, but 7 or 6 times out of 10, you're going to get the shot that you want. And bear in mind, we're talking percentages here a lot in the NBA. 6 or 7 times out of 10 is a very, very good percentage. So play the percentage game, be fearless, and don't let even guys like Victor Wembanyama and Luke Cornett in this game too be able to change those shots. Make sure you get the shot you want, and respect to Jalen Brunson and the New York Knicks, because it seems like they are able to do that over and over again. For me, the team that's going to come out of the East this season. But we'll flip over now, Drew, to continue covering cleaning the glass, I should say, covering all 30 teams in the league, because we're going to flip over to the West, and there are some really good teams in the top six in the West. But once again, it feels like the Denver Nuggets are the most realistic option to stop the Oklahoma City Thunder. Draymond Green came out recently, Drew. I don't know if you caught this from his podcast, and he basically said that the Warriors going 73-9 broke them. And I'm sort of looking at this now and wondering, to what extent chasing these kind of records could break the OKC Thunder. The Warriors, of course, were brilliant in those playoffs that followed the 73-9 regular season. They ended up, losing in quite spectacular circumstances to the Cleveland Cavaliers in the finals. But even to make it to the finals after having, slugged it out really in that regular season to make sure they got that record was a massively impressive feat, of course. And maybe the legs told in the end in terms of how they kind of collapsed in those finals. But I think most NBA fans who were around to watch those finals could see that it was just something inspired from LeBron James and Kyrie Irving and the Cleveland Cavaliers that allowed them to get back into that series as well. And it wasn't necessarily that the Golden State Warriors collapsed by any stretch of the imagination. But if we kind of move that into the modern day and say that the OKC Thunder are going to chase these kind of records, and you're already hearing Mark Daigneault sort of being asked about it in press conferences too, I'm wondering if OKC have a major regular season that gets them to break the record. if they're going to break down in the playoffs, how much, if you're the Denver Nuggets, you're going to be sat waiting in the wings going, well, we're ready to steal a march if they do break down in these playoffs because, you know, Denver took them to 7 last season. You know, if you're even looking at it in terms of how much of a fight can we give them over 7 games, well, Denver have proven that they absolutely can. They have all the same tools they had last season, but even more in terms of the depth that we maybe saw they were lacking last season in Denver. So, you know, if I'm the Denver Nuggets, even with how good OKC Thunder are, I'm looking at this season and being like, I'm confident with what we've got on this side. We'll let them fight out whatever they're going to go for on that side, and we'll be waiting in case there's any slip up.
Yeah, you're right. The Denver Nuggets is just they're just sitting back in the weeds. While everybody's out there on the dance floor, they're just on the wall with their drink, just watching everyone dance, which is the OKC Thunder, right, on the dance floor, and waiting for their opportunity to pounce. Because you look at Denver and you look at the standings, and there hasn't been a lot of chatter about the Nuggets. It's just everyone has just assumed that they'll be there at the end, but you look at their record and you're like, well, how? Because they're dealing with injuries. Braun has been out. Christian Braun has been out with an ankle injury after signing that big deal and stepping up into a bigger role. And then their unsung hero, Aaron Gordon's been out since November 21st with that hamstring, and no telling how long he's going to be out. He dealt with that last year, actually dealt with it in the playoffs last year. But this team just continues to roll. And, the supporting cast is really stepping up. And Jokic is just, I mean, we got to stop taking him for granted. He started off the season with multiple triple doubles and then even a 50-point game. And we just assume that it's like clockwork, but this is ridiculous what he's doing. And then they say the best ability is availability, and Jokic is always there. Like he doesn't miss many games. So the Denver Nuggets, you're right, they're waiting back in the weeds because it's going to happen, Josh. I've been in that situation before. I actually saw that clip with Draymond Green, and he's right. Obviously, I don't have the perspective of an NBA season and playing in the NBA, but playing in Europe, I was part of a historic team that we won 30 something games in a row. We played over 60 games. And the expectation was for us to win all four trophies, which in Europe, or specifically the British League, is the league, the playoffs, the trophy, and the cup. And so that's what we were really chasing. We're in the same situation that OKC was, where it's talked about regularly, and ultimately we were able to do it, but it was an anticlimax because I remember when we won the playoff final, there was no celebrating in the locker room. It was almost as if everyone was like, it was a sigh of relief that we didn't F it up. You know what I mean? And I kind of see and can foresee OKC going down that same path, that they chase this record. And once they ultimately do, because I think they will, they just have too much depth. That once they get to the end of the regular season, they will take a sigh of relief and be like, whew, we did it. We didn't F it up. And then it will be psychologically, it's completely draining. And what are the playoffs about? Like, it's psychological, right? It's the mental battle, it's the mental grind, it's 2 months of basketball. And I just think by the time OKC Thunder gets to the playoffs, they won't have anything left. They will physically, it's not physically, it's mentally what will drain them. And your Denver Nuggets will just be sitting there waiting for the dance floor to clear out. And then everyone will be going to the bar to get their drinks, and they'll be the only dancers on the dance floor, and everybody be watching them make their best move.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see what does happen come playoff time. It's some way off yet, but I feel like we're already getting a couple of tasters maybe of these kind of playoff games. We saw one in the NBA Cup last night. I'm not sure if San Antonio Spurs and New York Knicks specifically will face off against each other, but two teams that might face off against each other, Drew, are the Houston Rockets and the Denver Nuggets, and they played on Monday evening with Denver coming out on top. It was a game I actually managed to catch a substantial amount of live because my sleeping pattern is a little broken at the moment, so I woke up at like 4:30 in the morning, was like, you know what, I'll flick the back end of that game on for sure. And I have to say it was very closely fought. Each team has three rotation guys out at the moment. Denver is without Aaron Gordon, Christian Brown, and Peyton Watson even exited the game after less than 6 minutes in this one. Houston are, of course, still without Fred VanVleet, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Tari Eason. But what impressed me the most, Drew, was not necessarily the top-end talent, because we all know that both of these teams have that with, Kevin Durant and Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, etc. But the ability of guys like Spencer Jones on the Denver Nuggets to step up and give Denver a burst of energy during his 40 minutes. And, I looked at the box score after watching that game, and I was surprised that the counting stats didn't jump off the page as much as it seemed like they did, because the eye test of that game was, wow, Spencer Jones really impacted winning for the Denver Nuggets in this basketball game. We mentioned intangibles with New York before, and we've mentioned how many of these things, count come playoff time. And I think for you to be a guy that can stay on the floor in playoff time, which is, it's what we're talking about when we speak about a guy like Spencer Jones and the impact he can have, is can you stay on the floor in playoff time? And to be honest, Drew, I was watching this game and I was like, Spencer Jones can definitely stay on the floor in playoff time. There's a couple of other guys throughout both of these rosters really that I think can stay on the floor in playoff time. And I'm not sure about you, Drew, but that was one of the things that has definitely impressed me the most about the Denver Nuggets. Was I referenced last season, the Clippers. My Clippers took Denver to 7 last season, and one of the reasons I was kind of confident until I wasn't, was that Denver didn't have the depth last season. Denver were playing like 7 main guys on the roster at all times and had to keep the best players on the floor at all times. And suddenly now I'm watching it and being like, oh no, there's 8 or 9 legit guys who can definitely be here on the floor during crunch time now.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't get to catch this game, but I did check out the box score, and my takeaway was, why can't my Rockets beat the Nuggets? That's 2 games so far this year where they lost by 3. And again, like I mentioned about the Nuggets, they're much more equipped to handle the adversity this year just because of the depth. So shout out to the GM, and beefing up that team. Like we haven't spoke about Valanciunas, so Denver does have the opportunity to go big, how the Rockets went in the playoffs last year, which really affected the Warriors. Also, Cam Johnson. Like Cam Johnson was incredible at Brooklyn last year, and he has been very, very subpar so far this season. Where the chatter has been that Brooklyn won that trade with Michael Porter Jr. And for me, I look at it from a different perspective. I look at it as if, um, you know, that's an ace in the back pocket for the Nuggets because Cam Johnson hasn't played well this year and they're still winning. You have to think with a guy with that talent, with that type of shooting ability, is going to open up sooner or later, right? And so, that is a bonus weapon for Denver. Just so many more weapons, and this ship continues to move forward. And I got to give a shout out to who I think is the most important player on the Denver Nuggets, and that's David Adelman. He took over for Mike Malone last year in the playoffs. Think about how difficult that situation was to pull that trigger on your coach who you won a championship with. Can't remember the timing. Was it right before the playoffs or in the playoffs they pulled the trigger? Bro, I think it was a couple days before the
It
before the
was, yeah.
Clippers series, wasn't it?
Yep.
Like to pull that trigger, there's less than 1% of teams in all sports in the world that would make a move like that, especially with a championship coach. But he has proven that he is cut for the job. Um, and so he is the guy that is making all of these pieces work.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I was like incredulous at when you said, like, sometimes I just hate NBA discourse. Like when you mentioned about people speculating whether Brooklyn had won the trade to get Michael Porter Jr. Like, just stuff like that winds me up, because there's so much more to this business. By the way, the business and the financials of all this like made so much more sense for the Denver Nuggets. That Michael Porter Jr. contract wasn't a good one. He wasn't a guy who was excelling on Denver anymore. They bring in Cam Johnson, who, yeah, Cam Johnson is yet to excel, but Cam Johnson has proven that he's an off-ball guy. He can make shots. He can even defend on an underrated level. I think Cam Johnson can, and I think you'll see that more come playoff time. But that's all Denver are worried about, is will Cam Johnson be able to impact winning in playoff time. And listen, Michael Porter Jr. did it in one series, of course, or one season when Denver won the championship. But otherwise, he's been pretty disappointing in playoff action for Denver. Those health issues have come to the fore, and that 30 million contract has not looked like a good one. So. Yeah, I have absolutely no doubts at all that Michael Porter Jr. will have a great NBA career, of course, but that Denver will feel like they won this trade come the end of it because just people speculating based on what guys are doing on bad teams when they can
Yeah.
take and make all the shots. Drew, I'm not having that.
Yeah, and the difference is with the two players is that Cam Johnson, he is going to keep the defense honest. You're going to guard him in the playoffs, right? But the
Exactly.
key is, Josh, is that he's going to make the right play. If the ball is swung, he could be a connector. He can move the ball along. The issue with Michael Porter Jr. is that he was more of a heroic shot taker, and he made tough shots, right? But a lot of times those are bad shots. And the key is the way that Michael, let's not get that confused. Let's not compare that. No, Michael Porter Jr. is his style of play is not sustainable. It will win you a big game. It might even win you a series, but Cam Johnson's game is more sustainable. So that was the right move, and Michael Porter's doing what he's supposed to do. Like putting up numbers on a bad team, he has the ability to do that. So shout out to him.
Absolutely, yeah, and maybe at some point he'll still get the chance to be traded to a championship roster this season. There's a lot of players who've just become eligible for trades in the past few days, and to be honest, there's a couple of them on the Clippers, Drew, and I'm just looking and wondering now. I'm looking and wondering whether there are some big trades to come in the next few days. But we won't talk about that too much in this one, Drew. I know we spoke about it a little bit off air, but I kind of want to save that for when the trades are made rather than doing the speculation because honestly you can find that trade speculation everywhere when you look in NBA quarters these days. I want me and Drew to continue to clean the glass and talk about what we're seeing on the court in terms of the product right now. And I mentioned again, Drew, there are some really good teams in the top six in the West, and with all due respect, I'm being left to question if the Minnesota Timberwolves are the worst of that top six in the West, and yet still a really good team on their day. Their record out West would have them third in the Eastern Conference at the moment. There's literally the width of paper separating third and ninth in the Eastern Conference at the moment. But I keep seeing results for Minnesota out west, Drew, where they drop between 120 to 140 odd points on teams. In fact, they're the fourth highest scorers out west in terms of points per game, sixth in the league. I think they're sixth in net rating across offensive rating, sorry, across the whole league as well. Considering that they rank in the bottom five in the league for field goal attempts, Drew, I find the points per game stat and the offensive rating stat very, very impressive. And what that means, you're seeing again, not dissimilar to the New York Knicks, really, is that this is a team that's taken a jump in terms of efficiency of shooting this season. They're one that is fourth in true shooting percentage over the course of this season so far. And I've kind of like damn them with faint praise a little bit at times there, Drew. But given the efficiency stats, given the fact that those shot attempts will go up in the playoffs because they have to, and you have to see guys like Anthony Edwards, jacking up some shots to make sure that they get over the line in series. I'm wondering if this is actually a bit of a sleeper team with all that's going on in the West right now. There's a couple of series in there that you look at, and particularly the way the teams are at the top end of the Western Conference. If Minnesota can just stay handsome there in sixth place, then they're going to get the third matchup instead of having to face Denver or the OKC Thunder in that first round. And again, you mentioned about teams who aren't on the dance floor, who are maybe just stood off to the side watching people dance. The Minnesota Timberwolves might just be in the perfect place right now to make a bit of a run and be a sleeper team in these playoffs, Drew. I don't know what you think.
Well, what I think is the Minnesota Timberwolves are in the line to get in the club, and they don't have the ID. So the bounce has turned them around and told them to get out of here. They're not even in the club.
Oh,
No, but no. On a serious note, Minnesota is a sleeper team because they're another team that came into the season with a lot of hype. Two Western Conference finals appearance consecutive. And all the talk this offseason was, is Minnesota ready to make that jump? And so I covered them really early in the season. They got off to a solid start. Edwards went out. with the hamstring injury. And they just kind of disappeared from the national media's attention. But again, like Denver, you look at the standings and they're right there, right in striking distance, and their offense has really, really improved. It's more. It's more versatile now. They do a better job of moving the ball. It's become really efficient. But as their offense has improved, their defense has really suffered. I mean, they're still top 10 in defensive rating, but last year they were a top five team, and that's what was really their calling card. Alexander Walker yeah, he was really key for them last year. So that is, a reason why that team took a little bit of slippage defensively. But look, you still got Rudy Gobert back there patrolling the paint, even though, he isn't as efficient as he has been over the years. Age is starting to catch up. Jaden Daniels is a all NBA defender. So you got to think sooner or later they'll be able to clean up that side of the ball. But yeah, their offense is impressive. And Julius Randle, my goodness. Julius Randle, you haven't even mentioned him, but how great has he been so far this season for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to reference Julius Randle directly, Drew, to be honest, because there's been a sort of funny side narrative to Julius Randle so far this season. We've seen Anthony Edwards take another leap, especially as an outside shooter, again, referencing that sort of comparison with the Knicks before in terms of the efficiency in shooting that they've took. Anthony Edwards is shooting over 41% this season from three, which is, massively impressive because that was an area of his game that he definitely needed to improve on. But, it's Julius Randle's all-round game. We knew that Julius Randle could be a scorer. We even saw that when he was on the Knicks, and we saw that when he came to the Timberwolves. But he was on a podcast with a scientist recently where he was talking about smoking Mary Jane, Drew, and in New York while he was doing that. He said that he felt disassociated. He said that he felt all these things. It was finding a way to sort of medicate his anger and things like that on the court, but it meant that he wasn't processing any of these kind of emotions and dealing with any of it properly, which is, as he mentioned it, and we've already mentioned the mental side of things, particularly when it gets to playoff time. He was like, that's what separates the guys who are just good in this league from the elites, is that ability to, keep your emotions cool in those moments, to keep a cool head. And it sounds like now, from just quitting smoking that stuff, Drew, that Julius Randle has been able to notice the improvements within his game. And it's hard to argue on the basis of what we're seeing. Like the all-round game, as I mentioned, it's not just the sort of the shooting stats or any of that kind of thing. It's everything else that he's bringing to the table as well. I'm pretty sure he's the top assister on Minnesota's roster this season, or if not the top one, then at least up there. So Julius Randle, massively impressed by what he's doing, and all it took, Drew, was for him to pass the puff on to somebody else.
Yeah, he really came out of his shell. The turning point for Julius Randle was when Anthony Edwards went out with that hamstring injury early in the season, and he just exploded. And I watched a lot of off-season interviews with Minnesota because they were one of the first teams that I was covering on Amazon Prime, so I wanted to learn a little bit more about them. And Michael Grady, who's actually one of our play-by-play guys, he's actually, their home commentator. He asked pretty much every guy on the roster what was their favorite moment from the previous season. And most of them said was that Julius Randle step back game winner that he hit last year in the playoffs. And so we know what he's capable of. This is a guy who has, ever since he was traded from the Lakers, has gone on to be, one of the top 25 players in the league. He's paired with Anthony Edwards, so Edwards gets all the plaudits. So Julius Randle has become a sidekick, but he's a pretty good sidekick. He's just consistent. I'm just looking at his last 5 games: 24 points, 10 rebounds, 27 points, 9 rebounds, 21 points, 24 points, 28 points, just efficiently as well, like, 7 for 14, just really, really balling out. He's having a fantastic year so far this season.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, we'll move on to. I mean, we did the ugly stepsisters of the East last time out when we were cleaning the glass. these guys are among the ugly stepsisters of the West. They're
Who
unfortunately
was
clumped
that?
into this. They're unfortunately clumped into this episode on the basis that we've talked about two pretty good teams out east so far. One very good one in Denver, one pretty good one in Minnesota. But I've put on the agenda here, Drew, and I wanted to make sure I read this title out for the listener. Sacramento's beam is nowhere to be seen because
Bars.
besides the Clippers, who ironically have the same record as the Sacramento Kings right now. This might be one of my least favourite basketball teams, Drew, in terms of roster construction this season. They have a lot of similar problems to the Clippers in terms of, having the names on paper there, but just no direction in terms of basketball fit, in terms of rotations, in terms of how guys operate on the court together. There's no center rotation on this roster right now because Sabonis and Drew Eubanks are both out. Sabonis has been out since, well, for nearly about a month now. Actually, he went down on the 20th of November. But even with that, somehow put that to one side, even if you want to count that as as a great excuse for what the Sacramento Kings roster can or cannot do at the moment. This team cannot defend a damn thing inside the paint, Drew. They can't keep their opponents off the glass. Their stars have faded, and most of that shows up in their lack of physicality. Again, aging roster, a team that's not able to get up and down the court in the way that so many of these teams are able to do in the NBA now. A team that's not able to push the pace. When you think about this team under Mike Brown, was one of the quickest teams around in the NBA, and I kind of don't want to dwell on this because it's a new front office. I feel a little bit sorry for Scott Perry in terms of what he is inherited with this roster. I think he's just plugged a gap for now from a previous bad regime, and they've got their own pick this season. So there's probably an extent to which they can accept being bad. They'll go and get a lottery pick this season, and they'll crack on in terms of building for the future. But I don't know. I just feel so sorry for Sacramento fans. They're already a franchise that historically has had a lot of bad luck. Really, watch a lot of hard luck stories sort of unravel on the court. But I think back to that Beam team, Drew. I think back to Hallie on this roster, and I just wonder how it got so bad so quickly from the Beam days. Because I used to love watching that team.
How quickly things change in the NBA. That's why when you have a specific roster like the San Antonio Spurs and you have a generational talent, you have to capitalize on it now because who knows what the future holds when you talk about injuries. In this business, it's all about transactions, teams, with the new CBA. It's hard to keep your roster intact for several years now. So it's going to be constant turnover. And, Sacramento was one of those teams that vividly remember watching them go toe to toe with Golden State in the playoffs. And you were like, man, this team has a bright future. And now you look at their team and you're like, this is one of the few teams. I mentioned this a couple episodes ago about Washington. This is one of the few teams that I have not watched a single game. And the reason because I look at their roster and you know what comes to my head? Ew. Yuck. I mean, the roster is just disgusting. Is And I mean, and this is respectfully, right? Someone like Zach Levine, who has been an all-star, who has always put up great numbers. But what's the narrative? What's the common denominator? Has always put up good numbers on a bad team. DeMar DeRozan has always put up good numbers, but his teams weren't great. Toronto won the championship without him. And I'm sorry, Josh, but even your boy Westbrook, and I love Westbrook, but Westbrook, he hasn't proven that he can win on a high level. He's proven that he can give you big numbers, but again, so I mean, even when you look at Dennis Schroeder, every other summer you look at him in Eurobasket and you're like, how is this guy not starting in the NBA? And then he gets to the NBA and you're like, oh, okay, I see why. It's just a different style of game. But basically, my point is that they just have a collection of guys who historically have been known to put up numbers, empty calories on losing teams, and oh, by the way, have never been known for their defense. And so what you see is what you get with Sacramento. I feel for Doug Christie. I literally this morning just going on Twitter, Sacramento Kings stuff never come on my timeline, but a Doug Christie interview came across my timeline and he talked about how it was time to give the young guys a look to see what the future looks like. And it's ironic because the day before I actually saw uh, Mark Spears who was talking about Sacramento, and he was misquoted. He actually asked the account to clean up his wording because they had specifically named names about who Sacramento was trying to trade. But basically, all that's saying is that everyone in Sacramento front office know that this team isn't the team, and it's the biggest secret in the NBA that they are looking to offload some of these guys and start a fresh rebuild.
Yeah, and it feels like that is more than overdue already, even a short time into Scott Perry's reign there. So I mean, shout out to Sacramento fans. I feel your pain, as I mentioned, as a guy watching another aging roster elsewhere in the West at the moment. But we'll move on, Drew, to our understated stories of the week and our bold predictions for the week ahead. We'll start with the understated story. Do you want to take the rock on this first, or would you like me to go?
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, well, unfortunately, Drew, I'm going to have to be just sat away here in the background, writing a bit of an apology form for my understated story of the week this week because I started the season way too high on my Clippers. I started it probably low on some guys who've wronged the Clippers in the past. And I've been doing a lot of reconciling since. I've been in the confession booth. I've been had my head bowed, looking up, talking to my God about the basketball gods, about why he made these Clippers so bad this season. But he said, Josh, it's Christmas now. It's the time for recompense. It's the time to think about the people who may have wronged you in the past and give them their flowers. And so, my understated story of the week, Drew, with my hands up, looking up to the basketball gods, is Paul George is hooping right now for the Philadelphia
Yeah.
76ers. And
Mm.
I'm pretty sure at some point this season I said the Philadelphia 76ers should just focus on the future. They shouldn't bring back guys like Paul George and Joel Embiid into the lineup, whether that means, whatever it means for their playoff runs and whatever. And they're still, they're 14 and 11, so we're not talking about the best team in the East by any stretch of the imagination. But I mentioned that there's, a paper width between those teams 3 to 9 at the moment. So this Sixers team could really do anything. And actually, I think what you've seen from Paul George, in a way that he did do at times on Los Angeles Clippers. Like, I don't want to disrespect Paul George's Clippers career by any stretch of the imagination, because one thing that Paul George did, say what you like, was he plugged gaps in that Clippers roster when the Clippers needed him to be a sort of bona fide point guard and a de facto ball handler. Paul George did that when they needed him to be a guy who ran off pin downs and back screens and hit 3 pointers. Paul George did that when they needed him to be a bit more of an inside presence who cooked in the post because they'd lost that in terms of Kawhi Leonard and a guy who hit mid-range shots at a high level. Paul George did that. And he had to step up time and time again and find a way to, impact winning basketball on the Los Angeles Clippers. So I'm going to give him his flowers for that time now. However it ended, however he may have spoken about the Clippers on his podcast, and I'm still never going to necessarily forget that, but I'm prepared to forgive it because Christmas is the time for forgiveness, as they always say. I'm going to give some flowers to Paul George and say that he's shown that he can be a part of not necessarily the future of the Philadelphia 76ers, but we're seeing it around the league at the moment where there are veteran guys on rosters full of young guys that are able to help those young guys pass the torch to that next era, and Paul George has absolutely been able to do that in recent times with these Philadelphia 76ers. So shout out to PG-13. He'll still always be one of my favourite NBA guys of all time. Um, yeah, I'm prepared to forgive now, Paul. We can come back into each other's warm embrace at this stage, and shout out to what you're doing out there in Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's a good one, man. And shout out to Paul George. He had 35 points against the Hawks the other night. You know, the last two games, 35 points, 23 points. But most impressively is that he's 11 from 18 from the three, and he's starting to look a little bit more healthy. And we have to remember that last season with the Clippers, and I think a lot of people forget about this. This is why he was offered a max deal from the 76ers. He led the league in catch and shoot percentage. So this I think it was like 45% or something like that.
Mm,
This is a guy who has really what's the word that I'm thinking of? Has really evolved his game with his age because what did they say when you become old and you lose your athleticism, which we know Paul George was one of the elite athletes, but and he's lost a step in that department, but his shooting has really improved and it's starting to pay dividends. You're starting to see flashes of that over the last couple of games. So that's a good one, man. So shout out to Paul George. We always like to see a redemption story. And speaking of redemption, I'm gonna give you my understated story of the week because not many people have talked about this. If I mention the Memphis Grizzlies, what do you think, listeners? You think you probably gave up on them a couple of weeks ago when you saw this back and forth between John Moran and the coach, right? And John Moran has been injured, and you probably pulled the plug out of the socket and haven't even looked in the Grizzlies' way again. But let's give them their flowers because quiet is kept. They're 6-2 over the last 8 games and starting to turn things around. And so there's a multiple of guys that's getting it done, and they're doing this without having to lean on John Morant, which is the most impressive thing. We know about the rookie Coward, who is just have been incredible so far
yeah.
to start the season, but Alderman has really stepped up. There's just been a multiple of guys. We know about Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr. there. So I want to give the Memphis Grizzlies their flowers because it was around this turbulence is when I covered them against the Lakers. And I remember vividly in that second half, Morant just straight up quit. He straight up quit. And this was in an NBA must win game, cup game. And after that, I was like, forget about Memphis. Like, if you can't give me any effort, I'm down with you. But, over the last week and a half, they have really turned things around. So shout out to the Grizzlies.
Absolutely. Well, we'll move on to our bold predictions next. And Drew, I want you to take the rock on this one first, if you will, because mine's kind of unorthodox. So if you don't mind doing the honours.
I got you. I got you. So I'm a big believer in when you lose a championship game or you lose a must win game or an important game, your best players, your superstars always come right back and they have a bounce back performance. So, why do I bring that up? Well, the Spurs, who lost the NBA Cup, who we talked about earlier in the show, were distraught in losing that game. And one thing that I really respect about both of these teams, and I think this is going to change the narrative of the Cup moving forward in the future, both of these teams wanted to win this cup. San Antonio wanted to win this cup. And I love this competition for young teams because it gives them a reference point, allows them to kind of gauge where they really are, and it gives them that experience. The same thing as it did for Milwaukee, the same thing that it did for, not Milwaukee, excuse me, the same thing that it did for the Pacers last year.
Yeah.
It gives a young team a little bit of confidence saying, you know what, actually, we can compete. And so this is what this is going to do for the Spurs. But in the next week, Wemby is going to get off this minute restriction and he's going to give you a 40 ball. I'm predicting a 40 and 20 game for Wemby coming up in the next week. And guess what, Josh? Guess what? I'm even going to go deeper because we know I know my stuff. I called the LeBron James streak ending. Remember that, people. Me, Drew Lasker. I called that. No one else. So I'm calling it, Josh, on Christmas Day. Wemby is going to get off the minutes restriction, and Santa Claus will bring you a 40 ball along with 20 rebounds, and he's going to remind everybody of he is the next best thing. And you know what? He's been talking a lot of shit lately as well, and he's going to back it up on December 25th.
Wow, a 40 ball against the OKC Thunder. You remind me of that Clay Thompson holding up the four while he's sat on the bench at the moment, Drew. You're off on the sideline of that one prediction, that one moment, and you're holding up the four to anybody who will listen. You're winding everybody in the league up. Well, to be honest, Drew, like I looked at the slate of fixtures that we've got between now and when we next record, which I presume will be on Monday. We're sort of yet to discuss this off air, so we will at some point. But I was sort of thinking that between now and when we record on Monday, what do I expect to happen? Well, I looked at the slate of fiction. I was like, the Bulls could beat the Cavs because I'm not really thinking very much of the Cavs so far this season. The Grizzlies could maybe beat the Timberwolves, but that wouldn't be too much of a bold prediction. Neither of those things are bold enough, and I was looking through more and more slates of games, and I was like, nothing here is bold enough. So I'm going to go unorthodox with mine, Drew. I'm going to say that between now and when we next record, which I'm hoping will be next week, if it's after that, this prediction seems a little bit less bold, but I'm saying there's going to be a big trade. There is a big trade about to happen in the NBA. Every day I'm getting the notifications from Mark Stein where he's like, here's where the markets are all moving in the trade. Here's what Vegas thinks about who's going to end up on this team next. And I'm just thinking there's a real big trade around the corner, and there's a couple of people that I've got my eyes on, to be honest. Like, I'm looking at the Detroit Pistons as someone who's in the buyer's market. I'm looking at my Clippers, and you've mentioned the Sacramento Kings, etc., as people who are in the seller's markets. And I don't know, Drew. I just think there's maybe one or two guys at the top end of the Clippers roster who might not mind a little time in Detroit just to get themselves that last chance at a championship, to get themselves that last chance at redemption after what has been a poor few years, particularly in terms of playoff success on this Clippers roster. So Kawhi Leonard to Detroit, maybe? Is that what
You
we're
know
all is
what?
that what we're all thinking?
You know what? You're pretty good. I think you snuck in and read my notes because honestly, that was going to be my bold prediction is that there's a big trade coming up the pipeline. So two minds, great minds think alike. But let me ask you this before we close the show. There's been a lot of rumblings about who and where, but I want you to go even bolder. I want you to put your bold prediction in italics. Which superstar, and this might not be next week, it's when the trade actually happens, so I'll give you some grace. Which big name will be traded first?
Hey, I kind of said it there, Drew. I can just see Kawhi Leonard in that Detroit Pistons jersey. I don't know how you make the money up. I can see a world in which Tobias Harris comes back to the Clippers. Maybe we can bring Boban Marjanovic back with Tobias Harris as well, so we can revive that Bobby and Toby connection that we used to always love on the Clippers. But Tobias Harris was there during one of my favourite ever Clippers underdog seasons in 18-19. We're back to that sort of needing the Clippers to be an underdog mentality. So maybe Tobias Harris is the guy to lead this retooling on the Los Angeles Clippers. Maybe Kawhi Leonard finds himself over there in Detroit just for a couple of years rental to see if he can make some championship dust sprinkled over that roster there. Again, need to find out how that money gets made up. I'm kind of spitballing at this point, but I can just see Kawhi in that Detroit jersey. I can see him making that happen.
Wow. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Kawhi Leonard on the move here on Crossover the Pond. So, this is where you can come for all your NBA alerts. We have our shams across the pond. So we giving it to you here live on the podcast.
Yeah, short hezzy tweeting shams away over here in the UK. Well, as I promised at the top of the episode, next week we're going to put every single team in the league into a ranking system for how their calendar year of 2025 has gone, which started well for my Clippers, ended really badly for my Clippers. So you can find out what me and Drew think of that on next week's episode. We'll do our understated stories of the year rather than of the week. So understated stories of 2025 and then plus bold predictions for 2026 to come. So stay tuned for that. But with all that being said, all that leaves me to say is, Drew, lead us out.
Yes, everybody's getting in the holiday spirit. You see me even with my Santa Claus basketball t-shirt, but we will be back before the big day because there's a lot of great games coming up next Thursday. So until then, everyone enjoy your week. Take it easy out there in the shops. Don't spend too much money, and we'll catch you guys next week. Appreciate you.